Hey, what's going on everyone? Today we're talking about the brand new Sony A7C. Now, this is one of the smallest compact full frame cameras. I think the only camera that comes a little bit smaller than it is the Sigma FP, but if you take into account that it doesn't have a viewfinder, then this one's probably the smallest one. If you've already seen reviews about this camera, then you see a lot of people comparing it to an A7 III. Now, before we start, I'm gonna just go ahead and say that yes, there is a lot of things shared with the A7 III. It's almost the exact same in a lot of ways, but there are a lot of things improved on the A7C that I think are worth talking about. The first one, I like that Sony introduced it, is gonna be your flip out screen. Another vlogging camera, so that's kind of the theme for, I guess, 2020 is vlogging. So every camera now is coming out with the articulating. The one thing that I dislike about this one though is that it's not touch functional. So, I mean, it's very limited, just like your A7 III, to where you can pull auto-focusing points, but other than that, you can't go through the menus. And that being said, since you can't go through the menus that way, we're getting the old menus that we have on the previous Sony A7 cameras. We're not getting the brand new menu that we get on an A7S III. Another thing that I want to talk about is going to be the viewfinder. So it's not the most resolution that you're going to get like another Sony Alpha camera, but I really like the positioning of it, especially shooting with my right eye. I mean, it's completely out of my face. I'm outdoors right now in the sun. Well, I'm kind of in the shade, but I'm not getting a lot of light leaking in. Now, I think it fits its purpose, but a lot of shooting, I do not imagine you're gonna have it up to your eye, but you're gonna actually be using this flip screen. One thing that I do wanna note that I really, really love on this A7C is its ports. So we're going to have a microphone port on the very top. We're going to have a single SD card, and we took out the micro USB port. So we're just going to have a micro HDMI, USB-C on the bottom, along with the headphone jack. Now, the reason I like the ports is on the other Sony cameras, when we open them up, they just kind of flap down and just flail out and kind of get in the way. Sony made this one, so it actually is on a hinge. So I'm gonna show you a close-up here in a second, but they just hinge really nicely and they don't get in the way. It's also very smart on where they place the mic port. So it's separated from our headphone jack. So mic's on the top, headphone jack's on the bottom. So if I actually rotate my screen, it's not getting in the way of anything. So really smart move by Sony on that end. It's gonna pair with this 28-60 lens. If you look at it online, it looks really plasticky, but I do want to say that having it in my hand, it's definitely not a cheap lens. I like this focal length. I think that 28 is a decent amount for wide angle stuff, so if I want to vlog or just do some like landscape type shots, I can achieve that. And then 60, I feel like, is more than enough for portrait type work. I think this lens is going to be a good addition to this camera, and I think it's going to suit it very well. Now let's get back to the body style of the camera, kind of what's on the outside of it and the exterior. So it's very similar to something like a Sony a6600. On the plus side, it is using a Z battery. So the grip is a little bit larger, but it's still pretty shallow on how much I can hold in here. So not too big of a deal for me personally, but if you do have larger hands, then it's probably not gonna be a comfortable shooting experience with the Sony A7C. We are missing our front dial, so we're only gonna have two dials. We're gonna have our back dial, and then put most of the work on this control wheel on the back. I love when cameras have both dials, but if they had to knock one out, I guess, to keep it small and compact, then I guess that's something they had to do. But I really wish they would have kept that front dial. It would have made shooting manual a lot easier. We have a record button on the top, big, bright, and red, so I love that feature. Other than that, the buttons feel really good. The on-off button feels really firm, so I don't think you're gonna accidentally knock your camera on. Also, one thing on the Sony A7C is we're only going to have one C button for a customizable button. We had a lot more on other cameras, so it looks like Sony had to take some of them out to keep the same body style. Now, going back on what I mentioned earlier about the single card slot, this is a downside, unfortunately. Other manufacturers are making cameras priced around this that do have dual card slots. I wish Sony would have kept this into the A7C, and I think it's going to turn a lot of customers off, just for the mere fact that it doesn't have two card slots. And you saw something similar with your Nikon Z6 and Z7s. Obviously that has to do with size, so there are things you are going to be sacrificing to keep a full frame camera this small and compact. Since we're keeping such a small body size, the stabilization mechanism actually did have to be redesigned. So we're going to test the IBIS out in a second, but I am hopeful that it's going to be very similar to some of the other full frame Sony cameras. Now, the color science is going to be updated like our Sony A7S III, so it's going to be a little bit more color accurate. It should look better for skin tones, a little bit more pleasing. All right, so enough about specs. Let's actually talk about our shooting experience and get out there and shoot. We're here with Caitlin. You might recognize her for our Sigma 85 1.4 video for Sony. So let's get to it. A7C is going to have a really good autofocusing system. So as you can see, it's tracking the eye no problem. And an improvement on the A7C is that it actually has live autofocus when doing video as well. All right, so I guess this can be a test for the stabilization. So speaking of stabilization, they did have to redesign the stabilization mechanism just because of the size of the body. So hopefully it's going to be very similar to something like an A7 III, but we're about to find out. And I got downtown Austin right back here. All right, so something that they brought over from the A7S III, which I'm really impressed that's in the A7C, is the autofocus transitioning speeds. So we have an option to choose between 7. So right now I have it on 7, so it should be very, very fast. So I'm gonna go ahead and touch over where these trees are on the left side and it focused really fast. Back on Caitlin, hold focus again one more time. And if you can see this right now, I'm gonna go ahead and change it over and choose it to 1 and show you the actual difference between 1 through 7. So I'm gonna go into my menu real quick. It's gonna be in the movie mode, menu 2, autofocus transition speed. And we have 7 steps we can choose from, like I mentioned earlier. We're gonna go all the way down to 1. Press over here in the greenery, slow focus. And back on Caitlin, another smooth transition. So really happy that Sony was able to make this feature from the A7S III directly into the A7C. Okay, so we just finished shooting downtown with Caitlin. Now it's time for some final thoughts on the A7C. You know, other than the size, I really like the ergonomics of this camera, the port design, the flip out screen functionality that we have in an A7S III, and then the improved autofocusing system. I felt like those are all really good things that this camera offers. The IBIS I felt like was not the best for vlogging. If you check back in the video, it's really shaky after reviewing the footage. But for a photography standpoint, the IBIS was more than enough. And that's really happy to see, knowing that they had to reconstruction the whole design of that because of the body size. So I do want to talk about the lens as well. So the 28-60 f4 to 5.6. Now, I mentioned earlier that it definitely doesn't feel cheap. The quality of it was fairly decent, and I was actually impressed with how sharp some of the images came out because it was a kit lens. So I think you're gonna be really happy if you do pick this up and decide to get the kit lens. I think that's the main way to keep it small and compact. I like that Sony made a small, compact, full frame camera, don't get me wrong, but you're gonna need a small, compact lens as well to complement that. You're not gonna be able to use any of the large G Master lenses, or it's gonna be really top heavy. So I think the Tamron primes would be really nice for this. I think this kit lens would be really nice for this, and probably the 35 f2 Zeiss and maybe the 55 1.8 Zeiss. But other than that, I think the lenses are just going to be very awkward when shooting with it, especially if you plan on shooting for a day's time. Battery life was phenomenal. I'm really happy that they fit the Z battery inside of this body like they did with your 6600. No issue there. We were shooting for several hours out here, and I think I still have over 70% charge, while also shooting a little bit of video. So I definitely think you could use this almost all day. The USB-C port on the side, it's not gonna be able to power your camera indefinitely like your A7S III, but you're looking to probably double your battery life. So I think you could leave this running for something like 6 hours when plugged via USB-C to like a power bank of some sort. The other thing that they did improve on versus the A7 III, I know we weren't gonna mention that too much, but a lot of those cameras, the Sony Alpha cameras, have recording limits. This camera does not have a recording limit. It's not gonna overheat. So I didn't test this today, but you can look online. There's a lot of reviews out there where people are leaving this camera on for hours on end and it's not shutting off. So that's another really big improvement. I feel like there's a lot of good things for this camera, especially on the video side. If you're looking to do the autofocus transitioning, stuff like that, the improved autofocus, the better color science, but we're still getting 8-bit video. Now, Sony, I felt like, was always my best 8-bit video. I don't know if that makes too much sense, but I always felt like it was a lot cleaner compared to other cameras. I think for videographers looking to rig this up, a small B cam, something like that, or someone looking to get into full frame, I feel like this is a pretty decent camera. But for the photography standpoint of it, it's just kind of uncomfortable to hold in my hand. I didn't love the viewfinder, and the shooting experience wasn't overall great. That's not talking about image quality. Image quality was honestly more than enough with this 24 megapixel sensor. So other than that, let me know what you guys think of the Sony A7C, if you think you're gonna be picking one up, or if you're not gonna be picking up one up, and why. I'd really love to know your thoughts on this camera. Other than that, remember to like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you on our next video.